The bathroom door at the end of the west corridor shouldn't have been locked. Gerd Barrett knew this because he'd walked this hallway 600 times in the past year, and Princess Charlotte never locked doors. Not when staff were nearby, not when guards were on duty. She was 9 years old, polite to a fault, and had been taught since she could walk that privacy in the palace came with an understanding. You were never truly alone. Someone was always close enough to help, but the door was locked, and from inside he could hear crying. Barrett stopped 3 feet from the door. His right hand moved to his radio, fingers hovering over the button, but he didn't press it. Not yet. The sound wasn't loud, just quiet sobs, the kind a child makes when they're trying very hard not to be heard. He'd heard his own daughter cry like that once, after she'd fallen off her bike and didn't want to seem weak in front of her older brothers. The memory made his chest tight. He took 2 steps closer. The marble floor didn't creak. Nothing in Kensington Palace creaked. Everything was designed to be silent, to let royalty move through their lives without the constant reminder that they were being watched. But that silence worked both ways. It meant Barrett could hear things others might miss. The hitch in Charlotte's breathing, the way she was trying to stay quiet, the small, pained sound she made when she shifted position. Something was wrong. Barrett had been with the Royal Guard for 14 years. Before that, he'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan. With the Coldstream Guards, he'd learned to trust his instincts there, in situations where hesitation could cost lives. Those instincts were screaming at him now. This wasn't a child who wanted privacy. This was a child who needed help and couldn't ask for it. He raised his hand and knocked. 3 firm taps, loud enough to be heard but not aggressive. "Your Royal Highness, it's Guard Barrett. Are you all right in there?" The crying stopped immediately. Complete silence. That was worse somehow. A child who goes silent when an adult asks if they're okay is a child who's been told to keep a secret. Barrett's jaw tightened. He'd seen enough in his years of service to know that the palace, for all its grandeur and protocol, was still a place where children could be vulnerable, where power dynamics could be weaponized, where silence could be enforced. "Princess Charlotte," he kept his voice gentle. "I heard you crying. I'd like to help if I can." Another long silence. Then, so quietly, he almost missed it. "I'm fine." The words were wrong. Not just the tone, which was strained and shaky, but the phrasing itself. Charlotte didn't say, "I'm fine," when guards checked on her. She said, "Thank you, I'm all right," or "Nothing to worry about," or sometimes, when she was feeling playful, "Just practicing my singing." She was a naturally cheerful child, quick with a smile, the kind of kid who'd learned early that politeness could smooth over any awkward moment. But today she sounded scared, and she was lying. Barrett's hand moved back to his radio. He should call this in. Protocol was clear. Any concern about a royal family member's well-being, especially a minor, went up the chain immediately. He'd contact his commanding officer, who'd contact the Prince and Princess of Wales, and someone with more authority would handle it. That was the system. That was how things worked. But before we continue, make sure you're subscribed to Royal Guard Files. We share untold stories from inside the palace walls that you won't hear anywhere else. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Now, back to what Barrett did next. His finger was on the radio button when he heard it. A sharp intake of breath from inside the bathroom, followed by a word so quiet he had to hold his own breath to catch it. "Hurts." Barrett's training took over. His hand left the radio and moved to the door handle. He tried it once, firmly, locked from the inside. The bathrooms in this wing had old-fashioned bolt locks, the kind you could only open from inside the room. They'd been installed decades ago and never updated, because no one had ever thought they'd be a problem. Royals didn't lock themselves in bathrooms. Staff knew better than to invade privacy. The system worked on trust, until it didn't. "Princess Charlotte, I need you to open the door." Barrett kept his voice calm. the way he'd been trained to speak in crisis situations. No panic, no urgency that might frighten her more. Just firm, clear instruction. "Can you do that for me?" "I can't." Her voice was barely audible. Then, louder, strained. "It hurts." That was when Barrett made his decision. He didn't call his commanding officer. He didn't follow protocol. He took 3 steps back, measured the distance, and calculated the force he'd need to break through a 100-year-old wooden door without hurting the child on the other side. The door was solid oak, beautiful craftsmanship, original to the palace renovation of 1923. It would take more than a shoulder check to break through, but the frame around the bolt was old. Wood warps over time, especially in England, where humidity seeps into everything. He'd done forced entry training. He knew where doors were weakest. Barrett positioned himself, weight on his back foot, and drove his heel into the door just below the handle. The first impact made a sound like a gunshot. The wood cracked but held. He kicked again, harder. The frame splintered. One more kick and the door crashed inward, the bolt tearing free from wood that had held it in place for nearly a century. He went through fast, hands up and visible, making himself as non-threatening as possible, because the last thing a frightened child needed was a 6-foot guard charging at her. What he saw stopped him cold. Princess Charlotte was on the floor. She'd been sitting with her back against the bathtub, knees pulled to her chest. But when the door burst open, she'd tried to stand and immediately crumpled. Her right ankle was swollen to twice its normal size, purple and black from the middle of her foot to halfway up her shin. Her dress was torn at the hem, where she'd tried to pull it down over the injury. Her face was blotchy and red from crying, and when she looked up at Barrett, her expression wasn't relief. It was terror. "I'm sorry," she said immediately, the words tumbling out. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Please don't tell them. I'm sorry." Barrett's hands were already reaching for his radio, but something in her voice made him pause. "Don't tell them. Not don't tell anyone. Don't tell them. Specific. Directed." She wasn't afraid of help. She was afraid of someone finding out she'd been hurt. He knelt down slowly, making himself smaller, less threatening. His knees hit the cold tile, and he stayed there, 3 feet away, giving her space. "Your Royal Highness, you're injured. We need to get you medical attention." "No." She shook her head violently. "No doctors. Please. They'll be angry." "They'll be angry. Not she'll be disappointed or he'll worry. They, plural. And angry, not concerned." Barrett felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd been around the royal family long enough to know that William and Kate didn't inspire this kind of fear in their children. They were hands-on parents, affectionate, the kind who got down on the floor to play and showed up to every school event. Their children ran to them when they were hurt, not away from them. So who was Charlotte afraid of? "Can you tell me what happened?" Barrett kept his voice soft. He was still kneeling, still not moving closer. "How did you hurt your ankle?" Charlotte's eyes darted to the door, then back to him. She was calculating something, weighing her options. For a 9-year-old, she had remarkable control over her expressions. He watched her smooth out the panic, pull her shoulders back, lift her chin. She was putting on the princess face, the one she showed cameras and crowds. The mask. "I tripped," she said. Her voice was steadier now, more controlled. "On the stairs. I didn't want to bother anyone, so I came here to sit down. It's not that bad. I just need a moment." It was a good lie. She'd probably been coached on how to deflect questions, how to maintain dignity, even in difficult situations. But Barrett had 3 daughters, and he knew what a child looked like when they were protecting someone. Charlotte was protecting someone. Barrett didn't know it yet, but his decision in the next 30 seconds would set off a chain of events that would reach all the way to King Charles himself. But in that moment, kneeling on cold bathroom tile, while a princess sat 3 feet away, with an ankle that clearly needed immediate medical attention. All he could think about was his own daughter, the one who'd cried quietly after falling off her bike, the one who'd said she was fine when she wasn't, because she didn't want to disappoint anyone. "Princess Charlotte," he said carefully, "I believe you're trying to be very brave right now, but that ankle needs to be looked at by a doctor. I can see bone." It wasn't entirely true, but it was close enough. The swelling was severe. "I'm going to call for medical assistance, and I'm going to stay right here with you until they arrive. Is that all right?" She stared at him for a long moment. Then, so quietly, he almost missed it. "She said if I told anyone, they'd send my mother away." Barrett's blood went cold. "Who said that?" But Charlotte had gone silent again, that mask firmly back in place. She'd revealed too much, and she knew it. Now she was shutting down, pulling back into herself the way children do when they realize they've broken a rule they didn't know existed. Barrett stood slowly and pulled out his radio. He didn't take his eyes off Charlotte. "This is Barrett, West Wing. I need immediate medical response to the family quarters, second floor bathroom. Princess Charlotte is injured. Repeat, Princess Charlotte requires immediate medical attention." The response came back within seconds. "Copy that, Barrett. Medical en route. Do you need additional security?" He looked at Charlotte, at her swollen ankle and terrified eyes, at the way she was still trying to hold herself together, even though she was clearly in significant pain. "Negative on additional security, but I need someone to contact the Prince and Princess of Wales immediately. They need to be here when medical arrives." "Understood. ETA on medical is 4 minutes. 4 minutes. Barrett moved to the doorway, positioning himself so he could see both Charlotte and the corridor. Standard procedure for protecting a royal family member. But he wasn't protecting her from an external threat. He was protecting her from whoever had told her that getting help would result in her mother being sent away. That was when he heard footsteps. Quick, purposeful, the distinctive click of expensive heels on marble. They were coming from the direction of the king's private quarters. Barrett's jaw tightened. He knew those footsteps. Everyone who worked in the palace knew them. You learned to recognize them so you could make yourself scarce when necessary. Queen Camilla was coming. She appeared at the end of the corridor like something out of a period drama. Perfectly coiffed hair, pearls, a dress that probably cost more than Barrett made in 6 months. Her expression was pleasant, controlled, the picture of royal composure, but her eyes were hard. "Guard Barrett," she said, her voice carrying that particular tone of aristocratic disapproval that could make grown men feel like scolded children. "I heard a tremendous noise, and now I understand there's been some sort of incident." Barrett straightened to attention. "Your Majesty, Princess Charlotte has sustained an injury. Medical is en route." Camilla's gaze moved past him to the broken door, then to Charlotte. Visible inside the bathroom, something flickered across her face. Not concern, something colder. "I see. And was it necessary to break down the door? Surely the child could have simply opened it." "She was unable to open it, ma'am. The injury prevented her from moving." "How unfortunate." Camilla took a step forward. "I should go to her. She must be quite frightened." Barrett didn't move. Every instinct he had was telling him not to let this woman near that child. But she was the queen consort. She outranked him in every way that mattered in the palace hierarchy. Refusing her access would be a career-ending move. He thought about his daughter on the bike, about the quiet way she'd cried, about how he'd picked her up and carried her inside and held her while she finally let herself fall apart, safe in the knowledge that no one would punish her for being hurt. Barrett moved slightly, not blocking the doorway, but making it clear he wasn't going to simply step aside. "With respect, Your Majesty, I've already contacted the Prince and Princess of Wales. They'll be here shortly. Perhaps it would be best to let them handle this." Camilla's pleasant expression didn't change, but her eyes went even colder. Are you suggesting I'm not capable of comforting my step-granddaughter? I'm suggesting that Princess Charlotte is in considerable pain and medical personnel will need room to work. The corridor is quite narrow, and having too many people present might complicate treatment. It was a diplomatic way of saying what he really meant. Charlotte is afraid of you, and you're not getting near her while I'm standing here. Camilla understood perfectly. The air between them went tense. For a moment, Barrett thought she might actually try to push past him, but then they both heard it. More footsteps. Running this time. And a voice Barrett had heard hundreds of times over the past year, usually calm and measured, but right now edged with panic. Where is she? Charlotte. Prince William rounded the corner at a dead run, Kate right behind him. They weren't in formal attire. William was in jeans and a sweater. Kate's hair was pulled back in a hasty ponytail. They'd been somewhere in the palace, doing something normal, and they'd dropped everything the moment they got the call. The look on William's face when he saw his daughter on the bathroom floor was something Barrett would remember for the rest of his life. Not the prince. Not the future king. Just a father who'd just realized his child was hurt and he hadn't been there to prevent it. William went straight past Camilla without acknowledging her, straight past Barrett, and dropped to his knees next to Charlotte. Sweetheart, what's happened? Are you all right? Charlotte looked at her father, then at Camilla standing in the doorway, then back at her father. Barrett watched her make another calculation. He saw the moment she decided to keep lying. I fell down the stairs, she said. I'm okay, Papa. Really, it's not that bad. But Kate was already kneeling next to her, and Kate was looking at the ankle, with an expression that suggested she knew exactly how bad it was. Charlotte, darling, we need to get you to a doctor. This needs X-rays. I don't need X-rays, Charlotte said quickly. Too quickly. It's just a sprain. It'll be fine. William's hand was gentle on his daughter's shoulder, but his voice was firm. Charlotte, your ankle is the size of a football. You need proper medical attention. We're not negotiating this. Medical staff arrived then, 2 paramedics with a wheeled stretcher and equipment bags. They moved efficiently, professionally, the way people do when they've treated royalty before, and they'd understand that speed and discretion are both essential. One of them, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, knelt next to Charlotte. Hello, Your Royal Highness. I'm Sarah. I'm going to take a look at your ankle, all right? Can you tell me where it hurts most? Charlotte pointed to the discolored area without speaking. Sarah examined it carefully, her hands gentle, asking questions about pain levels and whether Charlotte could move her toes. Charlotte answered each question in that same controlled, careful voice. The princess voice, the one that kept everyone at arm's length. Barrett stayed in the doorway. He was watching Camilla, who hadn't moved. She was standing in the corridor, perfectly composed, watching the scene, with an expression that was hard to read. Not concerned exactly, more like someone observing a situation to see how it would develop. Sarah looked up at William. Your Royal Highness, I'd recommend we transport to the hospital for X-rays. There's significant swelling and discoloration. I'd want to rule out a fracture. William nodded immediately. Whatever she needs, we'll follow in the car. Actually, I think Mum should ride with her, Kate said quietly. She was still holding Charlotte's hand, and Charlotte was holding on, like her mother was the only solid thing in a tilting world. I'll go in the ambulance. You can bring George and Louis and meet us there. It was smoothly done, the kind of quick parental coordination that happens when 2 people have been partnering in childcare long enough to read each other's minds. But Barrett noticed something else. Kate hadn't looked at Camilla once since entering the bathroom, and Charlotte hadn't looked at her either. The paramedics were preparing to move Charlotte onto the stretcher when Camilla finally spoke. If there's anything I can do to help, she began, her voice all concern and grandmotherly warmth. "We have it handled, thank you," Kate said. Her tone was pleasant. Absolutely pleasant. But there was steel underneath it, the kind that made it clear this wasn't a request for assistance. It was a dismissal. Camilla's smile tightened, just slightly at the corners. "Of course. Do let me know if there's anything the palace can provide. Extra staff, perhaps, or if Charlotte needs company during her recovery." "That won't be necessary," William said. He was watching the paramedics carefully position Charlotte on the stretcher, making sure they supported her injured ankle properly. But there was something in his voice, too, something that matched Kate's tone. United front. "We'll manage." And just like that, Camilla was excluded. She stood there for another moment, as if waiting for someone to change their mind, to acknowledge her offer of help. When no one did, she smoothed her dress and nodded. "Very well. Charlotte, dear, I do hope you feel better soon." Charlotte didn't respond. She was focused on her mother, who was gathering Charlotte's discarded cardigan and speaking quietly to the paramedics about the best route to take through the palace. Camilla turned and walked away, those expensive heels clicking on marble, each step measured and controlled. Barrett watched her go. He'd seen a lot in his years of service. He'd learned to read situations, to understand what wasn't being said as much as what was. And what he'd just witnessed was a family closing ranks against one of their own. The question was why. The ambulance ride to St. Mary's Hospital took 12 minutes. Barrett followed in a separate vehicle with Wright, another guard who'd been assigned to the security detail. They didn't speak much during the drive. What was there to say? They'd both seen enough to know something was deeply wrong, but guards didn't speculate about royal family matters. Not out loud, not even to each other. But Barrett couldn't stop thinking about Charlotte's words. She said, "If I told anyone, they'd send my mother away." The pronouns mattered. She, not he, not they, she. And the threat wasn't about punishing Charlotte. It was about removing Kate from the picture entirely. That kind of manipulation required two things: authority and cruelty. Someone with enough power to make a 9-year-old believe they could separate her from her mother, and enough coldness to use that fear as leverage. Barrett had served under commanding officers who ruled through intimidation. He'd seen what it did to people, how it made them question every decision, second-guess every action, how it made them small, but those were adults, trained soldiers who'd volunteered for that life. Charlotte was a child, and someone had deliberately made her afraid to ask for help when she was injured. The hospital had been prepared. When you transport a member of the royal family, especially a child, arrangements get made fast. They entered through a private entrance where photographers couldn't reach. Charlotte was taken directly to a private examination room on the 3rd floor, away from the general emergency department. Kate stayed with her every second. Barrett and Wright positioned themselves outside the room. Standard security protocol, but close enough to hear voices through the partially open door. A doctor arrived within minutes. Dr. Morrison, according to the name on his white coat. He was in his 50s, grey-haired, with the calm competence of someone who'd spent decades in emergency medicine. Barrett watched him enter, saw Kate stand to greet him, saw the doctor shake her hand and then immediately turn his full attention to Charlotte. "Well now, Princess Charlotte, I hear you've had quite an afternoon," Dr. Morrison said. His voice carried through the open door, warm and gentle. "Shall we have a look at what's going on with that ankle?" Through the gap in the door, Barrett could see Charlotte on the examination table, still wearing her torn dress, still holding herself with that careful control. Kate stood beside her, one hand resting on Charlotte's shoulder. The doctor was examining the ankle with careful fingers, asking questions about pain levels, about what had happened. Charlotte repeated her story about the stairs. She'd tripped, she said, caught her foot on the edge of a step and twisted it as she fell. It happened so fast. She didn't want to make a fuss. She thought if she just sat quietly for a while, the pain would go away. Dr. Morrison listened without interrupting. He was still examining the ankle, gently manipulating it, watching Charlotte's face for reactions. "And you say this happened on the stairs? Inside the palace?" "Yes, sir." "Which stairs, darling?" Kate's voice was soft, but Barrett heard the edge underneath. She was asking her daughter to commit to the lie, to make it specific enough that it could be checked. Charlotte hesitated, just for a second. "The West Wing stairs, near the library." "And when did this happen?" Another hesitation. "This morning, around 10. Barrett checked his watch. It was nearly 3 in the afternoon. Charlotte claimed she'd been sitting in that bathroom for 5 hours with a severely injured ankle, in significant pain, deliberately not asking for help. That alone should have raised every red flag. What 9-year-old has that kind of pain tolerance? That kind of determination to hide an injury? Dr. Morrison seemed to be thinking the same thing. He looked up at Kate, and something passed between them, an understanding. Then he turned back to Charlotte with that same gentle expression. "Well, we're going to need some x-rays to see exactly what's happening inside there. It's going to take about 20 minutes. Your mum can come with you if you'd like." "I'm not leaving her side," Kate said firmly. They wheeled Charlotte out on a transport chair, Kate walking alongside, holding her hand. Barrett and Wright followed at a discreet distance. The radiology department was on the same floor, another private room already prepared. Barrett positioned himself outside while they went in. He could hear the technician explaining the process, hear the mechanical whir of the X-ray machine, hear Charlotte's quiet answers to questions. Wright shifted position next to him. "First time I've ever broken down a door," he said quietly. Barrett glanced at him. Wright was younger, maybe late 20s, only 2 years into Royal Protection duty. "You did the training at Hendon?" "Yeah. Forced entry, hostage situations, all of it. But this is different, isn't it? Breaking down a door to get to a royal family member, and not because there was a threat, because she was too scared to open it herself." Barrett didn't respond. He was watching the hallway, tracking every person who walked past, every hospital staff member who came within 20 feet of the radiology room. Standard security protocol. But he was also thinking about what came next, because Charlotte couldn't keep lying forever. Eventually, someone would ask the right question. Someone would notice the inconsistencies. Someone would push past her careful practice story and get to the truth. He just hoped that someone would be William and Kate, not investigators, not press, not someone who'd turn this into a scandal before the family had a chance to handle it privately. But Barrett thought the worst was behind them now. He thought getting Charlotte to the hospital was the hard part. He was wrong. The real storm was just beginning. The X-rays took 23 minutes. When Charlotte and Kate emerged, Dr. Morrison was with them, and his expression was carefully neutral. That was never a good sign. Doctors who have simple news deliver it immediately. Doctors who have complicated news put on professional faces and suggest follow-up conversations in private rooms. They returned to the examination room. Barrett heard William's voice before he saw him. The prince had arrived, probably driving at speeds that would have gotten anyone else pulled over. He sounded out of breath, like he'd run from the parking garage. "Is she all right? What did the X-rays show?" Barrett positioned himself where he could see through the door gap. William was standing next to the examination table, one hand on Charlotte's head, looking at Dr. Morrison with the kind of intensity that came from barely controlled fear. Dr. Morrison pulled up the X-ray images on a computer screen, mounted to the wall. "The good news is there's no fracture. The bone structure is intact." "And the bad news?" Kate asked. "The bad news is this is a severe grade 2 sprain, possibly grade 3. There's significant ligament damage, extensive soft tissue injury, and the swelling suggests considerable trauma to the area." Dr. Morrison used a pen to point at specific areas on the X-ray. This kind of injury typically results from high-impact trauma or extreme rotational force. It's not consistent with a simple trip on stairs. The room went very quiet. What do you mean? William's voice was carefully controlled, but Barrett heard the edge in it. Dr. Morrison turned away from the screen to look at Charlotte directly. Princess Charlotte, I need you to understand something. I'm not here to get you in trouble. I'm here to help you. But in order to do that properly, I need to know exactly what happened to your ankle. Charlotte's face went carefully blank. I told you, I tripped on the stairs. Sweetheart, Kate said gently, the doctor is saying your injury doesn't match that story. And her voice caught slightly. I've been looking at your ankle, and I agree with him. This looks like something else happened. Nothing else happened. Charlotte's voice was rising, getting defensive. I fell. That's all. Why doesn't anyone believe me? William knelt down next to the examination table, bringing himself to eye level with his daughter. Charlotte, look at me. He waited until she did. No one is angry with you. Whatever happened, whatever really happened, you're not in trouble. But we need to know the truth. We can't help you if we don't know the truth. Barrett watched Charlotte's face. She was 9 years old, sitting on an examination table with an ankle that hurt badly enough to make her cry, surrounded by her parents and a doctor, all of them asking her to break a promise she'd been threatened into keeping. The weight of that was visible in every line of her small body. I can't, she whispered. I promised. Kate's hand tightened on Charlotte's shoulder. Who did you promise, darling? Silence. Charlotte, William said, his voice firmer now. Who made you promise not to tell? More silence. Charlotte was staring at her hands, her face crumpling. She was losing the battle with her composure, and they could all see it. The careful mask was slipping. The princess was becoming a frightened child. Dr. Morrison stood. Your Royal Highnesses, I'm going to step outside for a moment to give you some privacy, but I do need to say this. Based on the injury pattern, I'm required to document this examination carefully. There are protocols when a child presents with injuries that don't match the reported cause. He let that hang in the air. I'll be just outside when you're ready to continue. He left, closing the door behind him. Barrett watched him walk past, saw the concern in the doctor's face. Morrison wasn't just worried about Charlotte's ankle. He was worried about what had caused it, and he was a mandatory reporter. If he suspected abuse or neglect, he had legal obligations. Inside the room, Barrett heard Kate's voice, soft and urgent. Charlotte, baby, listen to me. Whatever someone told you about keeping secrets, whatever they said would happen if you told us, they were wrong. No one can send me away. No one has that power. Your father and I are not going anywhere. You understand? We're right here, and we're not leaving. But she said, Charlotte stopped abruptly, realizing she'd revealed too much. Who said? William pressed. Charlotte. Who told you that? A long pause. Then, so quietly Barrett had to strain to hear. Grandmother. Barrett felt something cold settle in his chest. There were two women Charlotte might call grandmother. The Queen Consort was technically step-grandmother, but Charlotte had been taught to call her grandmother Camilla. The other option was Carol Middleton, Kate's mother, but that made no sense. Carol was warm, doting, the kind of grandmother who showed up to school plays and taught her grandchildren to bake. Inside the room, William's voice had gone very quiet. Grandmother Camilla told you that if you told anyone you were hurt, they would send your mother away. She said, Charlotte was crying now, really crying, the kind of tears she'd been holding back for hours. She said that Mummy wasn't really royal, that she was only here because you wanted her, and if the family decided she wasn't good enough, she'd have to leave, and it would be my fault because I can't even follow simple rules about staying quiet. Kate made a sound like she'd been punched. William's face went absolutely rigid, the kind of anger that was too big for words. Barrett had seen combat veterans with that expression. It was the look of someone who'd just discovered their child had been systematically hurt by someone who was supposed to protect them. "What rules?" William's voice was shaking. "What did she tell you to stay quiet about?" And then it came out, all of it. The story Charlotte had been holding inside for weeks, maybe months. It poured out in broken sentences between sobs, and with each revelation, Barrett felt his understanding of the situation shift. It had started small, little criticisms, comments about Charlotte's posture, her table manners, the way she spoke. Camilla would pull her aside after family dinners, after public events, and point out every tiny mistake. But she'd do it privately, always when William and Kate weren't around, and she'd frame it as helping, as teaching Charlotte what it meant to be a real princess. Then the criticisms got harsher, more frequent. Charlotte wasn't elegant enough, wasn't refined enough, too loud, too energetic, too much like her mother, which was said with a tone that made it clear this wasn't a compliment. And then came the corrections. That's what Camilla called them, corrections. If Charlotte slouched, she'd have to stand against a wall for 30 minutes, book balanced on her head. If she fidgeted during a formal event, she'd lose television privileges for a week. If she forgot to curtsy fast enough, there would be extra deportment lessons that cut into her playtime with George and Louis. The ankle happened this morning. Charlotte had been summoned to Camilla's private sitting room. There was a formal tea service set out, the expensive china that was only used for important guests. Camilla was teaching Charlotte how to pour properly. The angle of the pot, the position of the saucer. Charlotte's hands were shaking. She'd been standing for 40 minutes already, as punishment for slouching at breakfast. Her legs hurt. She was trying so hard to do everything right, but she poured too fast. Tea splashed onto the antique tablecloth. It was just a few drops, nothing that wouldn't wash out. But Camilla's face went cold. She told Charlotte to clean it, up, now, on her hands and knees. Charlotte got down, reached for the napkin, and Camilla stepped back. Stepped back suddenly, without warning, and her heel came down on Charlotte's ankle. The girl was kneeling, ankle extended behind her, and the heel caught it at exactly the wrong angle with the full weight of an adult woman behind it. Charlotte screamed. Camilla didn't apologize, didn't offer help, didn't call for medical assistance. Instead, she told Charlotte to be quiet, told her that real princesses didn't make scenes, told her this was what happened when you couldn't follow simple instructions. And then she said if Charlotte told anyone, especially her mother, the family would realize Kate had raised her children wrong, that Kate wasn't fit to be Princess of Wales, that she'd be sent away and Charlotte would never see her again. And Charlotte, 9 years old and in excruciating pain, believed her. She'd limped to that bathroom and locked herself in and stayed there for 5 hours, too terrified to ask for help, because she thought telling the truth would cost her her mother. By the time Charlotte finished talking, Kate was crying silently, one hand pressed to her mouth. William had stood up and walked to the window, his back to them, his shoulders rigid with barely controlled rage. The room was silent except for Charlotte's hiccuping sobs. Barrett stood outside the door and felt his own anger rising. He'd served in war zones. He'd seen cruelty. But this was different. This was calculated, systematic. A woman in a position of absolute authority, using that power to hurt a child, and then weaponizing that child's love for her mother to ensure silence. He pulled out his phone and made a decision. That would change everything. Barrett didn't know if the same rules would apply. He was about to find out. Dr. Morrison finished his examination and documentation. Charlotte's ankle was properly stabilized now, wrapped in a compression bandage with strict instructions about ice, elevation, and rest. She'd need crutches for at least 2 weeks, possibly longer, depending on how the healing progressed. Morrison prescribed pain medication and scheduled a follow-up appointment for 5 days out. She's going to be fine physically, Morrison told William and Kate in the corridor while Charlotte was getting dressed with a nurse's help. The ligament damage will heal, but Your Royal Highnesses, I need to be direct with you. The psychological impact of what she's been through may take longer to address. A child who's been systematically abused and manipulated into silence doesn't just bounce back because the truth came out. She'll need support, possibly counseling. Kate nodded, her face pale. We'll make sure she gets whatever she needs. Good. Morrison hesitated, then continued. I've documented everything in her medical record, the injury pattern, the timeline, her statements about what happened. If you need those records for any kind of investigation or legal proceeding, they're available. I want to be clear about that. William shook his hand firmly. Thank you for everything, for listening to her, for taking this seriously. They brought Charlotte home to Kensington Palace 2 hours later. Not to the main residence, but to their private apartment, the one space in the entire complex where they could control who came and went. William carried her up the stairs himself, despite her protests that she could manage with the crutches. Kate walked ahead, already on her phone arranging for George and Louis to stay with Carol Middleton for the night. Barrett and Wright maintained security outside the apartment. It was nearly 6 o'clock now. The confrontation at St. James's Palace was scheduled for 8. 2 hours for William to get Charlotte settled, to make sure she felt safe, to prepare himself for what was coming. At 7:30, a car arrived to take William and Anne to the meeting. Kate stayed behind with Charlotte, as planned. Barrett watched the prince leave, saw the set of his jaw, the controlled fury in every movement. This wasn't the diplomatic William the public saw. This was a father going to battle for his child. Barrett didn't attend the meeting at St. James's Palace. He wasn't high-ranking enough for that room. But Commander Vale briefed him the next morning, after a night when Barrett had stayed on duty outside the Wales apartment, making sure no one disturbed them. The meeting had been brutal. King Charles had tried, initially, to find a middle ground, to suggest that perhaps there had been a misunderstanding, that surely Camilla hadn't meant to step on Charlotte's ankle, that the girl might have misinterpreted stern grandmotherly guidance as threats. He'd asked for Camilla's version of events. Camilla had been smooth, controlled. She admitted to providing deportment lessons, to teaching Charlotte proper royal protocol. She'd framed it as preparation, as helping the child understand the weight of her future responsibilities. Yes, perhaps her teaching methods were old-fashioned, but they were the same methods she'd been taught. Character was built through discipline. She'd meant no harm. And the ankle, an accident, a terrible accident. She'd stepped back without realizing Charlotte was behind her. The child had been emotional, had made it seem worse than it was. And as for threatening to send Kate away, well, children often misunderstood adult conversations. She'd merely been explaining that everyone in the family had to meet certain standards. It was masterfully done. Calm, reasonable, just plausible enough. But then Anne had spoken. She'd laid out the timeline, the systematic nature of the corrections, the escalating punishments, the deliberate isolation of Charlotte from her parents during these sessions, the specific threat about Kate being sent away, phrased in a way that a 9-year-old would absolutely understand as real. And finally, the fact that Charlotte had been in severe pain for 5 hours, had locked herself in a bathroom rather than ask for help, because she'd been made to believe that telling the truth would destroy her family. This wasn't discipline, Anne had said, her voice cold. This was torture, psychological and physical, and you did it to a child who trusted you. William had added one more detail. Charlotte wasn't the first. George had mentioned, when questioned gently that evening, that Grandmother Camilla sometimes gave him special lessons too, about being strong, about not showing weakness. George hadn't considered it strange because he was 7 and didn't know better. But looking back with the lens of Charlotte's experience, the pattern became clear. Camilla had been systematically targeting William's children. King Charles had tried one more time to find compromise. Counselling for Camilla, supervised visits only, a formal apology. Surely the family could handle this privately. That's when William had delivered his ultimatum. She never sees my children again. Not supervised, not in public, not at family events. If she's in the room, we leave. If you insist on her presence at state occasions, we'll make other arrangements. Charlotte told us everything, and I believe her. More than that, I believe George when he says he was scared of her too, but didn't want to upset anyone by saying so. She had access to my children, and she abused that access. I will not give her a second chance to hurt them. Charles had argued, had pointed out the impossibility of keeping his wife separate from his grandchildren at major royal events, had suggested that William was being unreasonable, that families work through difficult situations. Anne had cut him off. Charles, if one of her staff had done this to Charlotte, what would you do? You'd have them arrested. You'd prosecute. The only reason we're having this conversation instead of calling the police is because she's your wife. But that doesn't make what she did acceptable. It makes it worse. She used her position, her authority, her relationship to these children as a weapon. The meeting had ended without full resolution. Charles needed time to think, to consider his options, to figure out how to balance his role as king, as husband, as grandfather. But William had been clear. Until there were real consequences, meaningful consequences, Charlotte and George would not be in the same building as Camilla. The next morning, Barrett was reassigned, not as punishment, but as recognition. He was transferred to personal security for the Prince and Princess of Wales, assigned specifically to their children. It was a promotion, technically. More importantly, it was a statement. The guard who'd broken down the door, who'd made the call, who'd put Charlotte's safety above palace politics, was exactly the kind of person William wanted protecting his family. 3 days later, an announcement came from Buckingham Palace. Queen Consort, Camilla, was taking a step back from royal duties for health reasons. She would continue to support the king privately, but would reduce her public engagements significantly. It was worded carefully, designed to avoid scandal. But anyone who knew the real story understood what it meant. Consequences. Not criminal charges, not public disgrace, but removal from the power she'd fought so hard to obtain. She was still Queen Consort in title, but in practice she'd been sidelined, cut off from the access she'd abused. Charlotte recovered. Physically, her ankle healed within 6 weeks. Psychologically, it took longer. Kate found her a therapist who specialized in childhood trauma, someone discreet who understood the unique pressures of royal life. Charlotte had weekly sessions. Slowly, carefully, she learned that asking for help wasn't weakness, that adults who hurt you and then demand your silence aren't acting from love, that she hadn't done anything wrong. George had sessions too. His experience with Camilla had been different, less overtly cruel, but damaging in its own way. He'd been taught that showing emotion was failure, that needing comfort was shameful. He had years of unlearning ahead of him. 6 months after the incident, Barrett stood outside Charlotte's school, waiting to escort her home. She came out with friends, laughing at something, moving easily now that the ankle had fully healed. When she saw Barrett, she waved, then said goodbye to her friends and walked over. "Ready to go home, Your Royal Highness?" "Yes, please." She fell into step beside him, and for a moment they walked in comfortable silence. Then Charlotte said quietly, "Guard Barrett, I wanted to say thank you for breaking down the door that day. Mummy told me you made a choice that could have gotten you in trouble, but you did it anyway because you knew I needed help." Barrett looked down at her. She was smiling, a genuine smile, the kind that reached her eyes, the kind he hadn't seen that day in the bathroom. "You're welcome. I'm glad you're feeling better." "I am," she said. Then, with the seriousness only a 9-year-old can manage, "When I'm older, when I have important responsibilities, I'm going to remember what you did. I'm going to remember that sometimes the right thing isn't the easy thing, and I'm going to try to be brave like you were." She climbed into the car, chattering now about a science project and what she wanted for dinner. Just a normal kid, heading home after a normal day at school. But Barrett stood there for a moment longer, watching the car pull away, and thought about courage. About how it sometimes looks like breaking down doors. Sometimes looks like telling the truth when you've been threatened into silence. Sometimes looked like a father standing up to a king. Sometimes looked like a little girl deciding to trust that she'd be believed. The palace still had its protocols, its hierarchies, its careful balance of tradition and power. But something had shifted that day. A message had been sent. The children came first. Their safety, their well-being, their right to grow up without fear. Everything else, every title and tradition and political consideration, came second to that. It was a message that needed to be sent. And it was a message that would be remembered. Because the thing about royal families, about institutions that have lasted centuries, is that they survive by learning, by adapting, by understanding when old ways need to change. The palace that had once tolerated abuse in the name of discipline, that had prized silence over truth, had been forced to confront itself. And in confronting itself, it had chosen better. Not perfectly, not without struggle, but better, and sometimes better is enough. If this story showed you something about the Royal Guards you didn't know, make sure you're subscribed to Royal Guard Files. We share these untold stories from inside the palace every single day. Drop a comment and tell us, have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect someone, even when it meant breaking the rules? We'll see you in the next one.